Rancher gave his jacket to a cold native. Next day, 200 warriors lined up at his fence. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin today's tale. The wind howled through the open plains, carrying the biting cold of the winter season. For a rancher named Thomas Hale, this was just another ordinary day on his lonely farm in the western United States. Thomas was a man of few words, preferring the solitude of his land to the busy chatter of town folk. His life had been hard, full of trials and endless hours of work. He had a modest ranch, with a few cattle and some horses. He wasn't rich by any means, but he found peace in the routine of tending to his animals and working the land. He had learned to survive on his own, through thick and thin, and he was content. But on this particularly cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the temperature dropped even further, something unexpected happened. A figure appeared at the edge of his property. It was a Native American man, bundled up in tattered clothes, shivering from the cold. Thomas immediately noticed the distress in his eyes. The man was barely able to stand, his face pale from the bitter cold, his breath visible in the frosty air. Without a second thought, Thomas quickly rushed over to him. "You look like you're in need of some help," Thomas said, his voice calm and kind. The man nodded weakly, unable to speak, but his gratitude was clear. He had been traveling for miles, through snow and harsh winds, searching for shelter, food, and warmth. He had been separated from his group and had no strength left to carry on. Thomas didn't hesitate for a moment. He took off his heavy winter jacket and draped it over the man's shoulders. The warmth from the jacket seemed to bring a glimmer of life back to the stranger. His shivering slowed, and he let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you," the man whispered, his voice barely audible. Thomas offered him a place to stay for the night, knowing full well that the freezing temperatures could claim a man's life in such conditions. He guided the man into his humble cabin, where they sat by the fire, and Thomas offered him a warm meal. The two men exchanged few words, but the silence between them was comfortable, as though they both understood the unspoken bond that had formed between them. The stranger, still exhausted, drifted into a peaceful sleep by the fire, and Thomas sat in his chair, quietly reflecting on his decision to help. Little did he know, the kindness he had shown that night would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the land, Thomas awoke to a strange noise outside his cabin. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but as he listened more carefully, he realized it was the sound of many footsteps approaching. He rose from his chair and looked outside. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. A line of 200 Native American warriors stood at his fence, their faces stern and serious. They weren't there to cause trouble, but their presence was overwhelming. The warriors stood in complete silence, waiting for something, perhaps a signal from their leader. Thomas's mind raced. What had he done? Why were they here? He was just a rancher, a simple man who had offered warmth and kindness to a stranger. Was this some form of retaliation? The tension in the air was palpable. The warriors remained motionless, but there was something powerful in the way they stood. It was as if they were waiting for a moment of acknowledgement. And then, from the group, a man stepped forward. He was tall, with a commanding presence, and his face was painted with symbols Thomas had never seen before. The man approached the gate slowly, his eyes locked on Thomas. The rest of the warriors remained where they were, their attention solely on their leader. When the man reached the gate, he spoke in a deep, resonant voice. "You have done a great thing," he said. "You have shown kindness to one of our people, and for that, we are here to honor you." Thomas stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. The words didn't quite register at first, but as the leader continued, it became clear. The man he had helped the night before was not just any stranger. He was part of a tribe that held respect and honor in high regard. By helping him, Thomas had unknowingly earned the respect of an entire community. And now, as a sign of gratitude, they had come to pay their respects to him. They had come to show their thanks, and perhaps offer something in return. The 200 warriors weren't there to take from him, but to give. This was the beginning of a new chapter in Thomas's life, one he never expected, and one that would change everything. The warriors stood motionless at the gate, a sea of silent faces watching Thomas Hale from behind their leader. The tension in the air was thick, but there was no malice in their eyes. They weren't here to harm him. They were here to honor him. Thomas's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. He had helped one man, a stranger, someone who had come to him cold and desperate. And now, in return, an entire tribe of 200 warriors stood at his doorstep. The leader of the group, a tall, imposing figure with a calm, commanding presence, stepped forward. His eyes were piercing, yet not unkind. "You saved one of our people," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You gave him warmth and shelter, and for that, we honor you. The debt is not just his, it is the tribe's." Thomas stood there, speechless. He had done nothing but offer kindness to a man who had needed it, never imagining such a monumental response. The leader, noticing Thomas's confusion, smiled faintly. "We do not forget acts of kindness," he said, "and our people do not take such things lightly. You have earned our respect." The warrior reached into his cloak and withdrew something small, a carved wooden token, which he handed to Thomas. The object was simple but elegant, with intricate designs etched into its surface. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried some deep significance. "This is a symbol of our gratitude," the leader explained. "Take it as a token of our bond, a bond that cannot be broken by time or distance." The warriors' words echoed in Thomas's mind, but the shock of the situation left him momentarily speechless. He looked at the token, then back at the line of warriors who stood in silence, waiting. The leader's gaze softened. "You have been kind, and for that, you will never want for protection. We will watch over you, as you have watched over one of us." Thomas could hardly believe what he was hearing. A few days ago, he had been a solitary rancher, living quietly and unnoticed. Now, because of a single act of kindness, he was being honored by a tribe of warriors. He couldn't fathom the weight of their words, but deep down, he felt a stirring of something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging, of connection. The warriors began to move, but they did not leave. They spread out around the ranch, not in an aggressive manner, but as a protective presence. They set up camp at the edge of his property, building fires and preparing for the night. Their quiet, respectful actions made it clear that this was no ordinary visit. Thomas's heart raced with a mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also awe. He had been given something he never expected, something that went beyond protection. It was a bond, an unspoken promise that they would stand with him, just as he had stood with the stranger in need. As the night wore on, Thomas found himself sitting by the fire, staring at the wooden token in his hand. He thought about the warrior's words, "You have earned our respect." But Thomas knew, deep down, that it wasn't about earning anything. It was about being human, being kind when others needed it, without expecting anything in return. And now, here he was, in the company of people who had shown him a respect and honor that he had never known existed. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching. He looked up and saw the leader of the warriors once again, this time with a woman by his side. She was tall and graceful, her eyes strong and full of wisdom. She looked at Thomas with the same respect the others had shown, and for the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about the kindness he had shown the man the night before. It was about something much deeper, something that had connected them all, beyond words and beyond borders. The woman smiled gently at him and nodded. "You will find," she said, "that in this land, kindness can open many doors." And with those words, she turned to walk away, her presence as commanding as the leader's. As she disappeared into the gathering darkness, Thomas felt something shift within him. He had always believed in the value of hard work, of self-reliance. But now, in the presence of these warriors, he realized that there was more to life than survival. There was connection, there was community, and there was honor in standing together, even when the world seemed divided. The night passed quietly, and the next morning, Thomas woke to find the warriors had left, but their presence lingered. They had left behind a few tokens, small reminders that their bond with him was not fleeting, but lasting. He looked out at his ranch, the sun rising over the hills, and felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had been given a gift of respect, of protection, and most importantly, a friendship. And as he stood there, looking out at the land that had been his home for so many years, he knew that his life would never be the same again. I never expected my life to change in such a way, Thomas thought to himself as he stood by his window, looking out over the quiet, expansive ranch that had been his home for so many years. The events of the past few days were still surreal to him. Just days ago, he had been a solitary rancher, living a life of routine and isolation. Now, he had the respect and protection of an entire tribe of 200 warriors. He had been given a gift, a bond that went beyond simple kindness. The warriors had left at dawn, but their presence still lingered in the air. It was not just the protection they had promised, but the deeper understanding between them that had formed over the course of that night. The leader's words echoed in Thomas's mind. "You have earned our respect." And Thomas couldn't help but feel that it was more than just respect. It was something that transcended words. The following morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thomas had gone out to the edge of his property to check on the cattle. His mind still grappling with the reality of what had happened. The land was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it was holding its breath. The cattle were grazing peacefully, unaware of the turmoil that had unfolded around them. But as Thomas walked along the fence line, he noticed something unusual. At the far end of the property, there was a figure standing, silhouetted against the morning light. It was the same warrior leader who had come the night before, but this time, he was not alone. Standing next to him was the woman who had spoken to him the night before, her presence just as commanding as the leader's. She looked at Thomas with the same respect, but there was something else in her gaze now, something deeper. "I have come to speak with you," the leader said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Thomas nodded, unsure of what to expect. The leader motioned for Thomas to follow him, and without a word, Thomas did. As they walked, the woman spoke, her voice soft but firm. "We have come to offer you a choice," she said. "The bond between us is not just one of gratitude. It is one of mutual understanding. We have watched you, and we see that you are a man of honor. But the question remains, what will you do with this honor?" Thomas stopped walking, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He had always believed in the value of hard work and self-reliance. But this was different. This was about something bigger than himself, something he had never considered before. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, his voice low, filled with uncertainty. The woman turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "There are those who would see our people destroyed, those who do not understand the value of our ways, our traditions. But we believe that you have the power to change that. You have the power to stand with us, to protect what is ours." Thomas felt a surge of emotion, but he held it in check. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle things on his own, but now, faced with the reality of what this bond meant, he was unsure. "But I am just a rancher," he said quietly. "I don't know what I can do against such forces." The leader stepped forward, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "That is where you are wrong, Thomas Hale. You are more than just a rancher. You are a man who understands the importance of loyalty, of standing up for what is right. That is why we have come to you." The woman nodded in agreement. "You are not alone in this. We will stand with you, just as we have stood with each other for generations." Thomas felt a fire stir inside him, a sense of purpose he had never known before. He had always been a man of principle, but now he was being asked to take a stand for something far greater than himself. The choice was before him. He could continue living his quiet life, isolated from the world, or he could join with these people, with this tribe, and fight for something worth protecting. The decision was not easy, but as he looked at the faces of the two warriors before him, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that demanded action. "I will stand with you," Thomas said, his voice firm with resolve. "I will fight for what is right." The leader smiled, a rare look of warmth crossing his features. "Then together, we will protect our land, our people, and our way of life." And just like that, Thomas knew his life had changed forever. He had been given a purpose, a mission, and a bond that would carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the leader and the woman turned to leave, Thomas watched them go, his heart filled with a sense of hope and determination. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he was no longer alone. He had found his place in this world, and he would fight for it with everything he had. Thomas Hale had made his decision, and with it came a weight he had never known. It was one thing to offer a man warmth and shelter. It was another to take a stand and fight for something greater than oneself. The morning after his commitment, Thomas spent the first hours of daylight reflecting on the choice he had made. He had always valued his independence, his quiet life, but now that life was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. He stood at the edge of his ranch, watching as the sun slowly crept over the hills. The warriors from the tribe had left the night before, but their words lingered in the air like the scent of wood smoke. "You are not alone," they had said. Now, Thomas was about to find out just how true that was. The peace he had known was gone, replaced by a sense of urgency and responsibility. He walked to the barn, his boots crunching the frost-covered ground beneath him. He had a lot of work to do, and not just tending to the cattle and repairing fences. No, the work that lay ahead was much bigger than that. He was being called to something more. As he stepped inside the barn, his thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of hooves. He turned, and there, just as he had expected, were the two warriors who had spoken to him the day before. This time, they were not alone. Behind them rode several more of the tribe's men, their faces serious, their presence unmistakable. The leader of the group, the tall warrior who had spoken with such authority, approached Thomas with a purposeful stride. "It is time," the leader said simply. "We have been preparing. The enemies we face are not far. We need your help." Thomas nodded, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had made his choice, and now it was time to act. "What do you need from me?" he asked. The warrior's eyes softened for a moment, as if appreciating the gravity of the moment. "We need to strengthen our defenses, make our position known. We will need your land to protect our people." Thomas glanced around at his ranch. He had spent years building this place from nothing. It was his pride, his home. But now, it was becoming clear that it was more than just his. It was a symbol of something larger, a place where two worlds could collide and find common ground. The warrior continued, his voice steady. "We have the numbers, but we need a place to stand, a place that can hold against what is coming. Your ranch, your land, can be that place." Thomas's chest tightened, but his resolve held firm. "You have it," he said, the words coming more easily than he expected. "You have my land. I'll fight alongside you." The warriors dismounted and began their preparations, gathering their weapons, securing their supplies. Thomas watched as they worked, their movements fluid and practiced, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of purpose. The peace he had once craved now seemed distant, almost insignificant. What he was about to do, standing with these warriors, protecting what was right, was more important than any solitary existence he had known. The tribe's leader turned back to him, nodding in approval. "We will make our stand together," he said. "And when it is over, we will protect what is ours. Our people, our land, our way of life." As the day wore on, Thomas found himself swept up in the rhythm of preparation. There was no more time for hesitation, no more time for second-guessing. He had made his choice, and now he was part of something bigger than himself. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Thomas stood at the edge of his ranch, looking out over the land that had once felt so solitary. But now, it felt different. It felt alive, full of promise and uncertainty. And as the sound of the warriors settling into camp echoed in the distance, Thomas knew one thing for sure. His life was no longer just his own. It was shared with these people, these warriors, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The days following Thomas Hale's commitment to the tribe were filled with activity and urgency. The warriors worked tirelessly to strengthen their position, fortifying the ranch and preparing for the conflict that seemed imminent. Thomas, who had once been a solitary rancher, found himself at the heart of a community, though not of his choosing. It felt strange, almost unsettling, to be a part of something so much larger than himself. But as the warriors moved around him, preparing their weapons and setting up camp, he realized that this was not just about defending land. It was about defending a way of life. A way of life he had once thought was his alone. As evening fell on the ranch, the atmosphere became charged with tension. The horizon, once serene and untouched, was now marked by the dark silhouettes of the warriors standing guard, their eyes scanning the distance for any sign of danger. Thomas stood by the barn, his hand resting on the railing, watching the warriors go about their work. The leader of the tribe, the man who had approached him the first night, came to stand beside him. He was silent for a moment, as though gathering his thoughts, before he spoke. "You've made the right choice," the leader said, his voice steady and calm. Thomas glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. The weight of the responsibility they shared was starting to settle on his shoulders. "I hope so," Thomas said, his voice rough. "I've never been a man of war. I've always believed in working the land, living quietly." The leader turned his gaze toward the distant hills, his expression unreadable. "And yet, here we are. Sometimes, the land does not ask for peace. Sometimes, it asks for protection." Thomas nodded, understanding the unspoken truth in the leader's words. He had always been a man of the earth, but now, he was being called to protect it, to stand up for something far greater than his own quiet existence. Just then, a rider approached, his horse kicking up dust as he made his way toward them. It was one of the warriors, a younger man with dark eyes that burned with intensity. "They are coming," the young warrior said, his voice urgent. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the reality of the situation hit him hard. He had no experience with battle, no understanding of the strategies needed to defend his land from whatever was coming. The leader turned to Thomas, his expression calm but firm. "You are ready," he said simply. "The land is ready. We are ready." Thomas swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what kind of readiness the leader was talking about. But there was no time for doubt now. He had made his choice, and it was time to face whatever lay ahead. As the warriors gathered, preparing their weapons and forming a defensive line, Thomas took his place beside them. The sight of so many warriors, their faces painted and their weapons gleaming in the dim light, sent a shiver down his spine. He had never been a fighter, but now, he was standing among men and women who had fought for their people's survival for generations. The young warrior who had delivered the message returned, his voice tense with urgency. "They are close," he said. "We must be ready." Thomas glanced toward the horizon, his heart pounding in his chest. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of movement. A group approaching, their figures slowly coming into focus as they drew closer. The tribe's leader stepped forward, his voice strong. "Stay close to me," he instructed Thomas. "Do not let fear cloud your judgment. You have stood by our side, and now we stand by yours." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. The enemy was close, and there was no turning back. As the first of the enemy riders came into view, Thomas's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what he had expected, maybe a band of raiders, perhaps a small group of men looking to claim the land. But as the group of soldiers emerged from the dust, he saw that they were well-armed and organized, their faces grim with purpose. The enemy was not here to negotiate. They were here for blood. And for the first time in his life, Thomas realized that he had a choice to make. He could run, hide, and hope that the warriors could protect him. Or he could stand with them, fight for what was right, and defend the land that had become his. As the enemy approached, the warriors tightened their formation, ready for battle. Thomas stood at the center, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the rifle the warriors had given him. He wasn't a fighter, but in that moment, he realized that fighting wasn't about being prepared for war. It was about protecting what mattered. The warriors around him were not just soldiers, they were family. And for the first time in his life, Thomas understood what it meant to fight for something greater than himself. As the enemy drew closer, the sound of hooves grew louder, the tension mounting with every passing second. Thomas took a deep breath, his heart racing. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, he would face it alongside these warriors, the people who had come to stand with him. And together, they would protect the land, the tribe, and the life they had all come to cherish. The enemy riders were now only a few hundred yards away, and Thomas Hale could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His hands, though trembling, gripped the rifle. With an unfamiliar determination. He had never been in a battle before, and yet, as he stood alongside the warriors, he felt a strange calmness wash over him. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land, and the tension in the air was palpable. The warriors were positioned in a defensive line, their faces set in expressions of quiet resolve. They knew what was at stake. This was not just a fight for land. It was a fight for survival. The enemy's approach was steady, but Thomas could see the hesitation in their eyes as they surveyed the warriors standing firm before them. They were used to dominating the land, to taking what they wanted, but now they had met resistance. And not just any resistance. These warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder with Thomas, were determined to defend their way of life. As the riders came closer, the leader of the enemy group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, called out. "This land belongs to us now," he shouted. "Surrender, and no blood will be spilled." The leader of the warriors, the same tall man who had been with Thomas from the beginning, stepped forward. His voice was steady, unwavering. "This land has always belonged to those who care for it. We will not surrender it to those who seek only destruction." The tension between the two sides hung thick in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though time had frozen. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. He had never faced anything like this before. The idea of standing in battle, of fighting for his life, was almost too much to comprehend. But the warriors around him weren't afraid. They had been fighting for their people, for their land, for generations. They had faced worse than this and survived. And now, they were willing to stand beside him. "We fight together," the warrior leader said to Thomas, his voice calm but resolute. "This is our land, our home, and we will protect it with our lives." With those words, the battle began. The enemy riders, seeing that there would be no surrender, spurred their horses forward, drawing their weapons. The warriors, too, were ready. The clash of steel and the pounding of hooves filled the air as the two sides collided. Thomas stood at the edge of the line, his rifle raised, his aim shaky but true. He had never fired a shot in anger, but now, in the heat of battle, he knew he had no choice. The first shot rang out, and he saw one of the enemy riders fall from his horse. The battle was chaotic, with dust flying and men shouting. But through it all, Thomas felt the strength of the warriors around him. He was not alone. He was part of something bigger than himself. He fought with them, and for the land that had become his own. The battle raged on, but as the hours passed, the tide began to turn. The enemy, unprepared for the fierce resistance, began to falter. The warriors pushed forward, their determination unmatched. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow across the battlefield, the enemy riders began to retreat. They had lost. The warriors stood victorious, their faces covered in dust and sweat, but their spirits unbroken. Thomas, too, stood among them, his heart racing, but filled with a sense of pride and relief. He had done it. He had fought, and he had stood alongside the warriors to protect the land. As the last of the enemy riders fled, the leader of the warriors turned to Thomas. "You have earned our respect," he said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "You fought like one of us." Thomas nodded, his chest swelling with pride. He had been a rancher, a man of the land, but now he was something more. He was a protector, a fighter, and a part of a community that valued honor, loyalty, and the land they fought for. The battle was over, but the journey had only just begun. The warriors began to celebrate their victory, but Thomas knew that the challenges were far from over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would be shaped by the bonds he had forged and the land he had sworn to protect. The days following the victory felt like a whirlwind to Thomas Hale. The battle had been hard fought, but they had won. The land was safe for now, and the warriors had proven their strength, as had he. It was strange to think of himself as a fighter now. He had always been a man of the land, working the cattle, maintaining the fences, and living alone in the quiet of the wide open spaces. But now, standing among the tribe, his role had changed. He was no longer just a rancher. He had become part of something bigger. The morning after the battle, the air was still, and the ground was littered with the remnants of the conflict, dismounted horses, weapons, and debris. The warriors had already begun their work, moving around the battlefield with the efficiency that only years of experience could bring. They cleared the land of the fallen and began tending to the wounded. Thomas stood off to the side, feeling the weight of what had happened settle in his chest. It was hard to comprehend how much had changed in such a short time. He had gone from offering a simple act of kindness to defending his land alongside an entire tribe. It felt like a dream, and yet, everything around him was so real. The leader of the tribe, the tall warrior who had become his guide and friend, approached him. His face was solemn but filled with respect. "You have proven yourself, Thomas Hale," the leader said, his voice steady. Your courage on the battlefield has earned you a place among us. Thomas nodded, unsure of what to say. The leader had been kind to him, showing him the ropes of tribal customs, but he still felt like an outsider. He had helped, fought, and stood alongside them, but there was always a part of him that felt separate. The leader seemed to sense this and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. You are one of us now, he said. The bond we share goes beyond blood. It is born of respect, of loyalty, and of standing together when the world tries to tear us apart. The words sank deep into Thomas's heart, and for the first time since the battle, he felt a sense of belonging. The warriors, who had once been strangers to him, now felt like family. They had fought for him, and he had fought for them. They had shared in the victory, and now they would share in the rebuilding. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thomas walked among the warriors, helping with the tasks at hand. The camp had to be repaired, and there were still wounded to tend to. Despite the chaos of the previous day, there was a quiet calm now, a sense of peace that hung in the air like the stillness before a storm. Thomas worked alongside the warriors, using his hands to build, to repair, and to restore what had been lost. There was no more time for reflection, only action. The land needed to be protected, and that was what he was here to do. As the days passed, the bond between Thomas and the tribe grew stronger. He learned their ways, their customs, and their history. He discovered a deep respect for their connection to the land, the earth that sustained them, and the traditions that had been passed down through generations. They were more than just warriors. They were guardians of something sacred. And now, Thomas was one of them. One evening, as the campfire crackled and the warriors gathered around, the leader called Thomas over. We are preparing for the next steps, he said. The enemy will not stop. They will regroup, and we must be ready. Thomas nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The fight was far from over. The battle they had won was just one chapter in a long, ongoing struggle to protect their people and their land. What can I do? Thomas asked, his voice firm. The leader's eyes glinted with pride. You will help us rebuild, help us prepare. But more than that, you will help us keep our strength. You will stand with us, not as an outsider, but as a brother. Thomas felt a surge of emotion at the words. He had always prided himself on his independence, his ability to survive on his own. But now, standing before the leader of the tribe, he realized that survival meant something more. It meant standing together. It meant fighting for something bigger than himself. As the fire burned low and the stars twinkled above, Thomas made a silent vow to the land, to the tribe, and to himself. He would never turn back. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a protector, and he would fight until his last breath to defend the people he had come to love as his own. Days passed, and the warriors continued their preparations. They repaired the camp, rebuilt the fortifications, and organized the supplies for whatever might come next. Thomas, now fully integrated into their ranks, worked tirelessly alongside them, learning the ways of his new brothers and sisters. The bond that had been formed in battle deepened with every passing day, and he could feel the strength of the tribe coursing through him. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a defender of the land, a guardian of the people. But despite the progress they had made, the threat of the enemy still loomed over them like a dark cloud. The enemy had retreated for now, but everyone knew they would return. The warriors were ready, their spirits unbroken, but the anxiety of the unknown never truly left. One afternoon, as Thomas stood watching the horizon, the tribe's leader approached him. The man's expression was serious, his brow furrowed as if contemplating a decision of great importance. Thomas, the leader said, his voice steady but filled with an edge of concern. There is a raid planned for the coming days. The enemy is regrouping, and they will strike at us with everything they have. Thomas looked at him, the weight of the situation settling in. How do we prepare for something like this? He asked. The leader's eyes met his, and there was a flicker of pride in them. We have the strength to face them, he said. But we need more than just strength. We need strategy. We need to outsmart them. The leader turned to face the warriors who were preparing nearby. The enemy will come with numbers, but they will underestimate us. We will use the land to our advantage. We will fight on our terms, not theirs. The words resonated deeply with Thomas. The land he had known all his life, the land he had always worked alone, now held a new meaning for him. It wasn't just his farm anymore. It was a battlefield. It was a symbol of resistance. Over the next few days, the warriors trained hard, preparing for the battle that would come. They practiced their moves, perfected their strategies, and ensured that everyone knew their place in the coming fight. Thomas, though not a warrior by trade, joined them in their drills, learning how to fight not just with his rifle, but with his mind. He learned how to read the land, how to use the natural terrain to create traps and defensive positions. It was a lesson he would never have expected to learn, but it was one that would prove invaluable. The night before the battle, as Thomas sat by the fire, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. He had gone from a quiet, solitary life on his ranch to being part of something much larger, something that would require every ounce of courage and strength he had. He had once thought that his life was enough, working the land, tending to his cattle, living quietly. But now, in the face of this impending conflict, he realized that his life was not just about survival. It was about fighting for something worth protecting. He looked up at the stars above him, the familiar constellations that had guided him for years. They seemed unchanged, unmoving in the vastness of the sky. But beneath them, everything had shifted. The world had changed. And now, he was ready to face whatever came next. The sound of hooves in the distance broke his thoughts. It was the scouts returning, and their faces were grim. They had seen movement. Large groups of enemy riders were approaching, and they would be here by dawn. The warriors immediately sprang into action. They gathered their weapons, checked their defenses, and took their positions. Thomas, feeling the rush of adrenaline course through his veins, took his place alongside them. He wasn't just standing there anymore. He was a part of this. This battle wasn't just for the tribe, it was for him, too. The first light of morning began to break over the hills, casting an orange glow over the battlefield. Thomas stood tall, rifle in hand, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked over at the warriors, their faces set in expressions of quiet determination. They were ready, and so was he. As the enemy approached, Thomas could feel the tension in the air. The ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with energy, as if the land itself was waiting for the inevitable clash. And then, the battle began. The first shots rang out, echoing across the plain. The warriors moved with precision, their movements fluid and practiced, while Thomas found himself moving in sync with them, feeling the weight of the rifle in his hands. The land, once his solitary refuge, now became a battlefield where his survival depended on the strength of his resolve and the unity of the people beside him. The enemy came in waves, but the warriors were relentless. They fought not just for survival, but for everything they held dear. And as Thomas fought alongside them, he knew that this was his purpose now. This was his fight, and he would stand by them, no matter the cost. The battle had raged through the day, the sounds of conflict echoing across the land. Thomas Hale, now more a warrior than a rancher, stood side by side with the tribe, each of them unwavering in their resolve. They had fought together, with the land beneath their feet as their ally, and the enemy had retreated. But as the dust settled and the final echoes of the battle faded, Thomas knew the war was far from over. The enemy would return, and they would need to be ready. As the night fell, the warriors gathered around the fire, their faces tired but triumphant. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, and the crackling of the fire seemed to be the only sound. Thomas sat with them, the weight of the battle heavy on his shoulders, but a strange peace had settled in his chest. He had stood his ground, fought with everything he had, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of belonging. The leader of the tribe, the man who had become his closest ally and friend, looked at him across the fire. "You have earned your place among us, Thomas Hale," he said, his voice calm. But there was a spark of something deeper in his eyes. "This land, this fight, it is as much yours as it is ours." Thomas nodded, feeling the depth of those words sink into his bones. He had started this journey as a lone rancher, but now, he was part of something far bigger. The warriors, the tribe, they had shown him a way of life he had never known before, one of unity, of strength, and of honor. But as he looked around the fire, Thomas knew that the real test had yet to come. They had fought this battle, but the enemy would return, and they would need to stand strong once more. The warriors turned to their leader, awaiting his next orders. The leader stood, his posture strong, his gaze steady. "We have won this battle, but there is much work left to do," he said. "The enemy will regroup. They will try again, but we are ready." The warriors murmured their agreement, their voices firm, their determination unwavering. Thomas stood with them, feeling the surge of strength that flowed through the tribe. He had never felt this before, the certainty that, no matter what came next, they would face it together. And that was something he could never have imagined when he first offered a coat to a cold stranger. Tomorrow, we rebuild. The leader continued, his voice steady. We make our camp stronger, our defenses higher. We do not stop. We do not rest. Thomas felt a surge of pride. They had fought for this land, for their people, and for each other. The land was not just soil, it was home. It was worth protecting. And now, it was his home too. The rest of the night passed in quiet reflection. The warriors spoke of their ancestors, of their battles fought long before Thomas had ever set foot on their land. They spoke of the land's history, its meaning, and what it meant to be a protector of it. Thomas listened, absorbing their wisdom, their strength. He knew this was just the beginning. He had made his choice to stand with them, and now, there was no turning back. As the fire burned low, the leader approached Thomas, his face thoughtful. You have shown the strength of your heart, he said quietly. You belong with us, and we will stand by you, as you have stood by us. Those words, simple yet powerful, meant more to Thomas than anything he had ever heard. In that moment, he understood the true power of community, the strength of a people who fought together, who cared for one another, and who would never turn away from each other. The next morning, as dawn broke over the land, Thomas stood once more at the edge of the ranch. The horizon stretched before him, vast and open, but now it was not empty. It was filled with purpose. The warriors were already at work, preparing for the future. And Thomas, now fully one of them, stood with them, ready to protect what they had fought for. Together, they would defend the land, their people, and everything they had come to hold dear. And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be.